verse 31, the next slide. But as touching the resurrection of the dead, have you not read that which was spoken unto you by God, saying, I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob? God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. Notice that word am, right? I am the God. He didn't say, I used to be the God, or, when they were alive, I was their God. They're still there. They still exist. He is their God right now. Am is kind of perfect present or something like that, meaning that they're actually still alive. Okay, and that really messed them up, because the Sadducees believed that all theological arguments had to come from the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And here Jesus quoted Exodus 3:6, in which God states that he is, not was, the God of the 3 Jewish patriarchs who had died but were now in heaven with him. And obviously were awaiting their future bodily resurrection. And when the multitude heard this, they were astonished at his doctrine, which means teaching. The surprise came from the fact that Jesus taught something that was not clearly seen before, that the patriarchs were still alive. Because, I think that these Sadducees actually wound up seeing it for the first time. Okay, and I'm going to be on verse 31. Yep. Okay. Okay, yeah. Here they were astonished. And this basically shut them up too. Okay. So now, back to the Pharisees. Okay. So in verse 34, but when the Pharisees had heard that he had put the Sadducees to silence, they were gathered together. Then one of them, which was a lawyer, asked him a question, tempting him and saying, and by the way, a lawyer was an expert in Old Testament law at that time. And again, tempting means to test him. He said, Master, which is the great commandment in the law? And this question was designed to see how well Jesus knew the law. And I guess what he didn't realize is that because Jesus was also God, he actually wrote the law. So you probably want to not ask questions about the law from somebody who wrote it. Okay, next slide. This thing's not working. Okay, 37. Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind. Here he's quoting Deuteronomy 6:5, which was part of the Shema, a prayer that every devout Jew recited at least daily. And Jesus said, This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And this is a quote of Leviticus 19:18. And in this scripture, Jesus didn't use phileo for the word love, which means friendship love, but he used agape, which means divine love, which is a love that looks beyond people's faults and failures. In verse 40, on these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So basically, Jesus summarized the law in 2 commandments. And if you think about all the other commandments that Moses, like the elder told us, that Moses carried down from the mountain twice, all the ones about shall not lie or covet your neighbor's goods, kill, steal, all that kind of stuff. If you love your neighbor as yourself, you're not going to do any of that stuff. So wouldn't it have been a lot easier to carry that down on one small stone, just those 2 commandments? But, God had the reasons for doing it that way too. But so that pretty much floored the Pharisees too, because they didn't really know how to come back after that either. Okay, and so now that they're asking him all these questions, and he already, tripped up the Sadducees, now it's his turn to trip up the Pharisees too. I think I went one too far. Okay. So now he's going to ask them a question. While the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them, saying, What think ye of Christ? Whose son is he? They say unto him, The son of David. Reasonable answer, that's what they believed. He saith unto them, How then doth David in spirit call him Lord, saying, The Lord, next page. The Lord said unto my Lord, Sit thou on my right hand till I make thine enemies thy footstool. Now, it looks kind of weird, but the first word, Lord, that's all caps, that's that word actually there is the Hebrew word for Jehovah God. And then it says, said unto my Lord in uppercase, lowercase O-R-D. That was the Hebrew word Adon, from which we get Adonai, which is divine superior, common title for the Messiah. So David is saying, God said unto the Messiah, sit thou on my right hand till I make thine enemies thy footstool. So if David called him Lord, how is he his son? And no man was able to answer him a word, neither durst any man from that day forth ask him any more questions. So they had enough. They got beat up too many times. Final knockout punch. But the reason that some of this, happened this way is because this passage basically talks about the dual identity of Christ, which he's David's son because he was a man, and he's David's Lord because Jesus is a divine Lord, a divine being. This question kind of stumped the Pharisees because they believed in a human Messiah only, not a divine Messiah. The mighty God manifest in the flesh is a divine Messiah. They thought the Messiah was going to come back in bodily form and be this great warrior that would kill all their enemies. So they didn't see the Messiah as being God. Somebody anointed by God, but not God himself. Okay. So that's the end of 22. Okay, now, verse 23, now Jesus is going to talk about the 8 woes. So in verse 1, then spake Jesus to the multitude, and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. That's kind of a little bit of an admonition. He's basically telling them, these people are in Moses' authority seat right now. And then he says in verse 3, all therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do. But do not ye after their works, for they say and do not. What that means is you have to obey what they say because the scripture tells you have to obey the man of God. And they are your God figure over you right now. But don't do like they do because they do some pretty wicked things. And he's building this up for the 8 woes that are coming. Let's see. Another thing to note here is that the disciples were unlikely to have had access to their own copy of the Torah, which was the early Bible, the 5 books, but only had access to the scriptures through these leaders. And also, another thing to note here is that he mentions Pharisees here because actually of all the different groups, which included Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and a few others, the Pharisees were the closest to the real doctrine. The only thing that he's dinging them for is that they didn't have the compassion that went with the scriptures. They knew the law. They believed the right things. They believed in the resurrection and all that stuff, but they just didn't have the compassion for the people. And they were kind of pious, super spiritual, we would say today. Okay. Let's see. Oh, okay. All their, they say and do not. For they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. So it's like they don't really care how much burden they're putting on the people. They're not about to do that stuff themselves, and they might even be telling them to do the right things, but they're not about to help them in any way. Okay. Now he's going to talk about hypocrisy. But all their works they do for to be seen of men. They make broad their phylacteries and enlarge the borders of their garments. Phylacteries are like little leather boxes that they would put some of the scriptures in, and they would hang them, they would tie them to themselves. It says they placed scriptures inside these leather cases, and then it's strapped to the forehead or to the back of the right hand, and that was so that they could strictly obey Deuteronomy 6, 8, and 9. Usually you were supposed to only wear them during prayer, but the Pharisees wore them all the time and in conspicuous ways, to show them in public, oh, look what I'm wearing, I'm more holy than you, kind of stuff. And there was also a practice in Numbers 15, 38, and 39 where God said that you should wear wide colored borders on the garments with blue and white tassels, and those were supposed to draw your attention to the tassels to make you think of God's commandments versus your own will or your own desires. So they did those things, and they made them even wider so that you could even see them better, and made them look all fashionista and everything. But it was all a big show. Okay. And love the uppermost rooms at feasts and the chief seats in the synagogues, and greetings in the markets, and to be called of men, Rabbi, Rabbi. Rabbi was the Hebrew word for great one, which was a teacher of high rank. But be not ye called Rabbi, for one is your master, even Christ, and all ye are brethren. So we're all brethren. There's no rabbis in our ranks. Now, I'm going to just hold that thought in case you guys are thinking that I'm talking about pastor. I'm definitely not. Okay, and verse 9, and call no man your father upon the earth, for one is your Father which is in heaven. Neither be ye called masters, for one is your master, even Christ. So Jesus was condemning these use of exalted titles for spiritual leaders that they were trying to lift their position to be near equal with God. But the church at the time did use titles such as apostle, prophet, evangelist, pastor, and teacher, and those were not condemned, and you can read about that in Ephesians 4:11. Okay? So it's okay to say pastor. He's not the exalted high master or anything like that, okay? So he's not our rabbi, he's our pastor. And pastor means teacher. It also means that somebody that watches after sheep. And we're supposed to be sheep, not goats. Okay. Oh. Wasn't done yet. Okay, in verse 9, 11. But he that is greatest among you shall be your servant, and whosoever shall exalt himself shall be abased, and he that shall humble himself shall be exalted. Now, we heard before when Jesus humbled himself and washed the apostles' feet, and if you want another good example of somebody who's your servant, you need look no further than your very own pastor. I mean, we all come in here tonight. This place is nice and cold. It's clean. It's picked up. Looks nice in here. The electricity is on. The plumbing works. There's bathrooms. The reason is because of pastor. He's always here, and he's always cleaning this place, and he's our servant. He has made himself a servant because he lives the Bible. So something for us to think about, too. And another thing here, too, in verse 12, it says, whoever shall exalt himself shall be abased. I saw something the other day in sports. I know that Brother Reynolds preached about sports the other day. But there is some things to be learned from sports. And, I used to tell my Sunday school kids that some of the best examples that you can learn from are bad examples. Okay? And we've had our fair share of bad examples even in the church. And God puts people there. You want to be coming to church, and you want to be a good example. You don't want to be in church because you're the bad example that God uses to show everybody else how not to be. Let's just put it like that. But I saw this person in sports, and he did some crazy play, and he was flexing his muscles and going, this, keep feeding me, I'm doing so great. I'm all, he was exalting himself. And me and Jacob both looked at each other and said, pride cometh before the fall. Next play, fumble. Next time he touched the ball, fumble. He was the GOAT of the game. He basically lost the game for his team. But that's what happens. I mean, God does make examples of people. And but I want to talk about the second part of that, because it says, and he that shall humble himself shall be exalted. Now, don't misinterpret that. That's not a new prescription for success. If you want success in life, you don't go around and try to act humble. Humbleness is the reward. Humbleness is what you're trying to achieve. It's not that you're going to be humble and then you're going to achieve greatness. No, if you want to be great, you have to achieve humbleness. It's the other way around. Okay? So that's how that part of that scripture works. Humbleness in itself is its own reward. Okay, verse 13. Now we're starting the woes. Here's the first one. But woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for ye neither go in yourselves, neither suffer ye them that are entering to go in. What they're talking about is that they weren't allowing people to follow Jesus, so they were trying to shut down the church, the new church. So this first woe is about false teaching. They were using their authority to try to stop people from believing and following Christ. And by the way, the word suffer means to allow. Okay. Second one. But woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayer. Therefore ye shall receive the greater damnation. So what they were doing, so the second woe is using religion to exploit the poor. Devouring widows' houses means that they were using their positions to influence claims against widows' estates for their profits. They also befriended vulnerable widows in hopes of being included in their wills. Okay, that's what they were doing at the time. Sound familiar? I'm sure it still happens today, Okay, so 15. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye compass sea and land to make one proselyte, and when he is made, ye make him twofold more the child of hell than yourselves. Now, this is the third woe, evangelism, to create carnal disciples. Compass means to travel, okay? So, but this wasn't really talking about them going out and getting Gentiles and converting them and making them corrupt. Actually, they were in the process of converting Jews from other persuasions to join their group. So there was different flavors of Jews around, but they were trying to convert the ones that were the most intelligent to become just like them, only worse. Okay? Okay. 16. Woe unto you, ye blind guides, which say, whosoever shall swear by the temple, it is nothing, but whosoever shall swear by the gold of the temple, he is a debtor. Ye fools and blind, for whether is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifieth the gold? And whosoever shall swear by the altar, it is nothing, but whosoever sweareth by the gift that is upon it, he is guilty. Ye fools and blind, for whether is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifieth the gift? Whoso therefore shall swear by the altar sweareth by it and by all things thereon. And whoso shall swear by the temple sweareth by it and by him that dwelleth therein. And he that swear by heaven sweareth by the throne of God and by him that sitteth thereon. So this is the sixth. Oh, and by the way, when he says him here, he's talking about God himself in verse 22. This was the fourth woe, ridiculous oaths. Okay, so at the time they had this oath where if you made a promise to God, an oath to God, and you bound your oath by the gold on the altar, then if you broke your oath, you owed money in the debt of that, what gold was on that altar when you said that, okay? But if you swore to the altar and not the gold that was on the altar, you didn't owe anything because God owned the altar, and you didn't own the gold. Man didn't own the gold. God owned the gold, so, or owned the altar. So you didn't break your oath. Sounds pretty dumb, right? And so what Jesus is saying, you're trying to make people think that the gold sanctifies the altar, but it's the altar that sanctifies the gold. So if you're making a swear, an oath to the altar, you're making the oath to the altar, to God, to the gold, and to, the God of heaven. So it's all inclusive, and you're wrong in thinking that, you can absolve people because they made basically a false oath. They said altar instead of the gold on the altar because they knew they might break that one. And that's what people were doing back then. Okay, so that one sounds kind of complicated, but it was, one of the practices at the time. Okay. Verse 23. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. Those ought ye to have done, and not to leave the other undone. So the fifth woe is valuing minor things over the more important matters. So, people, I've seen people split hairs. It may not even be over tithing, but over a lot of different things. Like they've got their walk with God so dialed in, but yet they're rude and mean to people. They pray 3 hours a day, they tithe, they fast and all this stuff. But when people try to interact with them, they're rude to them, cut them off. They don't associate with people that seem to be lower than them on their own self-described totem pole. I've seen these in other churches, and I've thought, oh my goodness, you should leave the weightier matters. You shouldn't leave the weightier matters undone. Love your brother as yourself is one of the two things that Jesus said first, right? So you might be able to make an argument for that I love God because I pray, I fast, I do all this stuff. But what about loving your brother, And that's just one example, but there's other examples. And this is one where all of us, I think, could do a sanity check. I mean, there's times when, you have good days and you have bad days. And the thing about being a true Christian is to have a lot more good days than bad days, especially when it comes to judging people. And indeed, look at the shape that our whole nation is in right now with all around judging people. So something to, this does not just apply to the Pharisees and the scribes. And none of these really do. Okay, here's another one. Ye blind guides, which strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. Now, strain at a gnat, what he's talking about here, the Old Testament forbade people from eating insects, gnats. Okay, they're on the do not eat list. Okay, so the Pharisees would teach people that if they drank wine, they would have to pour the wine through a sieve to capture any insects that might have gotten into the wine so that they wouldn't eat them, right? So, that's what's called straining a gnat. But instead, they're eating a camel, And it was just, it's humor in a way that Jesus is using here. Nobody's going to be able to swallow a camel. But what he's saying is, again, he's reiterating the fact that you've got all this attention to these little things like making sure there's not one single gnat in your wine, but yet you're swallowing a camel whole, because you're letting the weightier matters go. Okay, so verse 25. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you make clean the outside of the cup and of the platter, but within they are full of extortion and excess. Thou blind Pharisee, cleanse first that which is within the cup and platter, that the outside of them may be clean also. So the sixth woe here is clean on the outside and filthy on the inside. Pharisees were obsessed with ritual purity but neglected the corruption that was in their own hearts. They had all these religious ceremonies and, read down to the letter of the law, and, maybe, I don't know if they were doing Hail Marys back then. I'm pretty sure they weren't. Different religion, but they had their own version of the Hail Marys, and, how many times they probably positioned their hand over the person, or how many times the person kissed their ring or whatever. They had all these religious ceremonies, but they missed the weightier matters. And let's see, number 27. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones and of all uncleanness. Even so, ye also outwardly appear righteous unto men, but within ye are full of hypocrisy and iniquity. The seventh woe was whitened tombs of corruption. They used to apply whitewash, which was a chalky white paint, to the exterior of tombs. That was a common way to honor the dead. And, he's likening the fact that that tomb looks good on the outside, but what's on the inside is dead and corrupt. And there's all manner of bacteria and whatever eating away. There's what he's calling corruption on the inside. And that's basically how the Pharisees were. Okay, and then the eighth woe, verse 29. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because ye build the tombs of the prophets and garnish the sepulchres of the righteous. So the eighth woe was the descendants of prophet killers. To garnish means to adorn or to decorate. And say, if we had been in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. And in the blood means the death. Wherefore be ye witnesses unto yourselves that ye are the children of them which killed the prophets. What Jesus is saying here is that they're comparing themselves to the old reign in the Old Testament where they killed the wrong prophets. And they're saying, if we were back then, we wouldn't have killed these prophets. In fact, look at me. I'm, putting decorations on this prophet's grave and paying honor to these old prophets, right? But Jesus is going to flip the tide on them right now. Fill ye up then the measure of your fathers, ye serpents, ye generation of vipers. How can ye escape the damnation of hell? Wherefore, behold, I send unto you prophets, and wise men, and scribes, and some of them ye shall kill and crucify, and some of them shall ye scourge in your synagogues, and persecute them from city to city, that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel unto the blood of Zacharias, son of Barachias, whom ye slew between the temple and the altar. So, they're trying to say, we wouldn't have killed all these prophets, and Jesus saying, you're about to kill some of mine, including me. So, his prophecy is going to put them right where they belong. This is prophetic and actually, did happen very soon hereafter. Now, this guy, Zacharias, son of Barachias, if you were to look it up, it's in Genesis 4:8. Oh, no, wait. Abel was killed in Genesis 4:8. He was the first person to die for his faith. And 2 Chronicles 24:20 through 22 records Zacharias, son of Jehoiada, being killed by Joash after Jehoiada had done a lot of really good things for Joash to help his king, help him even become the king. But he killed his own son because he prophesied against him. And he was the last prophet that was killed in the Jewish Old Testament, basically, which went from Genesis all the way to 2 Chronicles. Okay, so basically what he's saying is that you're when you kill my prophets, you're going to be guilty of killing all the prophets from the beginning up until now. And then, this is true, it happened. Verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation. And it did come upon that generation. They killed, scourged, beat a bunch of Jesus' prophets, crucified Jesus, crucified some other prophets of the disciples. So, and then it says, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets, and stonest them which are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chicks under her wings, and ye would not. Whenever you see in the Bible two calls like that together, let me go to the right place here. A double address, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, it expresses great lament. So that was the writer's way of saying that he was crying for Jerusalem. And it's likened unto a hen watching after her chicks. So, Jesus was basically saying that they had made a lot of errors in what prophets they killed. Prophets that were false prophets were supposed to be stoned to death, but they had obviously made a lot of mistakes and stoned and killed ones that weren't false prophets. And they were about to make their greatest mistake yet. But you'll notice that Jesus actually was crying for Jerusalem because, he could see what was about to happen. Okay. And then it says, behold, your house is left unto you desolate. The word house here could mean the temple, but it could also mean the whole nation of Israel at that point. Two ways to say it, and there's some discussion on what it really means. But AD 70 marked the fulfillment of the whole town of Jerusalem getting desolated by the Roman armies. And then it says, for I say unto you, ye shall not see me henceforth till ye shall say, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. Again, some more debate on to whether this means when he came back to Jerusalem again, and by that time Jerusalem was being reprimanded for how many people were trying to turn to Christ, and then they were really happy to see Jesus come back to Jerusalem. But it could also mean that it was a prophecy about an end times prophecy about the Battle of Armageddon, when Jesus would return and take his church in the wedding feast. Okay, that's the end. Any questions? Okay. There's a lot of things here, and I mentioned that, he's really talking mostly about the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but trust me, the longer you've been a saint and the more if you fall into the trap of becoming self-righteous, every single one of these could apply to your own self. So it's kind of a caution even to the church today not to fall into the same trap that the Pharisees fell into and the Sadducees. Remember, these were the religious leaders of the nation that God chose to be his people. If they fell into that trap, what chance do we have? We were Gentiles. We weren't even chosen. And trust me, it can happen. We've seen it in the news and history. Lots of people starting new Christian sects, them falling from grace, killing bunches of people in the name of God. So, but, it can happen even on a smaller scale in your own church and in your own heart. So that's basically the take-home message from this scripture. Okay. If there's no other questions, you can all stand up. How do we dismiss?